we should talk about the reaction, the reception, and the box office of this movie because that's been just like a huge talking point and a big question because that first film was so successful. Big question like could they make another $1 billion at the box office? Could they even come close to that? What was the success of this movie going to look like? And now we actually have some hard numbers and I think a really hard truth and reality about what this film may do. But just for context, in 2019, the original Joker film debuted to $96.2 million in its North American debut, which is almost $100 million for an R-rated movie. Just an incredible, incredible opening weekend. As we have stated numerous times, it went on to accumulate a worldwide total of $1 billion at the box office against a budget of $55 million. And so it
A
was
lot of money.
easily one of the most profitable movies in terms of net
Yeah.
revenue of that year. It remained the top grossing R-rated film of all time domestically and globally until it was surpassed this year by Deadpool and Wolverine. Joker, the first one, it had relatively good reviews, not the greatest, but relatively good. Audiences gave it a B+ cinema score. Critic score on Rotten Tomatoes was 68%, which is still fresh. But now with Joker Folie, a movie that costs 3 times as much as the original, because right now
Wow.
budgets are between 190 and $200 million for this movie. So let's just call it 195 million dollars to make this movie 3 times as expensive as the first movie. When initial tracking came out 3 weeks ago, this movie was on pace to make $70 million domestically, which would have been a drop off, but not significant drop off from the 96.2 from 5 years ago. And then about a week ago, tracking dropped once again to about 50 to 60 million. And so it's like, okay, we're getting down really, really low here. But now after the opening 3-day weekend, we have the final tally, the final number that was just revised this morning. Domestically, Joker Folie has made $37.8 million at the domestic box office, which is less than half of what the first movie made in its opening weekend. Even by comparison, the original Joker made $39 million on its opening Friday alone in 2019, whereas this movie made $37.8 million in 3 days. And also in 2022, Morbius opened to $39 million in its opening weekend. So it didn't even make as much as Morbius from Sony, a movie that we revile and just do not like. Internationally, it pulled in 81.1 million for a worldwide tally of 118.9 million at the global box office. Rotten Tomatoes, it's not pretty. It has a 33% critic score and a 30% audience score, even lower than the critic score, which again doesn't really happen that often. Not only that, to add insult to injury, this movie has a D cinema score. D is in dog, folks. D cinema score. This makes this the first Hollywood comic book movie in history to earn a D cinema score from audiences. Wow.
Wow. What did Morbius get? You know what Morbius cinema score was? Oh man.
It wasn't a D. Somehow, some way, it's not a D or an F. It's an F for me, but it did not get that from audiences. Even a year ago, The Flash opened to 55 million at the domestic box office, earned a B cinema score. The Marvels opened to 46.2 million and earned a B cinema score. We know that those two movies ended up being some pretty significant flops here, but this is now performing even worse than a lot of those comparisons. What do you make of this, man? We'll start off with the box office numbers in particular, and then I do want to get to just like the conversation and discourse around the movie. But when you just look at these numbers and you just look out how dramatically this has fallen from just 5 years ago, what do you attribute it to, and what do you ultimately make of this result for them?
People were not interested. First and foremost, I feel like, okay, so of course there is, okay, we watched the movie, we felt a particular way about the movie. That's it. I feel like there was a decent amount of people actually who came into this movie knowing like, I don't think I'm going to like this. Like, I think they really knew, they knew the musical aspects of it. They had seen the trailers. They said, okay, but I kind of like the first Joker. All the big talk has happened. I've already feel like I'm not going to like this movie. And they proved themselves right. Like, I feel like a decent amount of people did that. And that does help lead to the cinema score. But I also think people have been over DC for a while. Like for a minute. Of course, we talked about other superhero movies, right? We talked about Marvel slump and all these other slumps in superhero films. People have been over a lot of this stuff for a minute, and we have been in these weird times where people are they just don't want to go see anything that doesn't rile them up in any sort of way. And I know just so many people, just like people were in your inbox talking about they don't need to make another one. There was a lot of people like discussing and talking about why is this a musical? Why is this? Why is this that? And I definitely think that played into how many people went to go see the movie. A lot of people straight up don't like musicals. That's a whole thing. That's one barrier that you have to think about. It's just the musical barrier in the first place. Then you make it Joker, then you make it a sequel, then you add all these other expectations onto it, and it makes sense to me why people didn't want to go see the movie or weren't interested in it. And so of course there's a ton to go into it, but I definitely think that musical aspect and people not wanting to go see it adds to the cinema score a little bit, but also I think it makes sense why Butts wasn't in seats the same as the first one. First one, drama, wasn't no musical, fresh off the boat, Joaquin, like all these things. In 2019 was a good year, like you said, that helps. That 2019 was a good year for comic book movies. Like, oh shoot, this thing is happening, and then this comes out, and it's not the same feel at all. Technically, it's not some fantastic year for comic book movies. Deadpool and Wolverine did good, don't get me wrong, but like, there's not a huge trajectory of comic book movies just going crazy, and people don't like musicals. So I'm sure there's more to that. I know there's more to that, but just off the bat, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, even when comparing it to the original, that first movie had a big narrative, I think, to help add hype to the film. As we mentioned, Todd Phillips was often touting how Martin Scorsese was influencing the direction of the movie. It's Taxi Driver mixed with the king of comedy. And for
Mm-hmm.
cinephiles, for film Twitter, for film bros, like that makes your ears perk up like, oh, I want to see that. That's Joker. That sounds really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Obviously, there were the concerns about the film potentially inciting violence. That was huge.
Mm-hmm.
Having security guards and SWAT teams at movie theaters, sort of parked outside, like just in case some shit popped off. That was like a big thing at the time when
Mm-hmm.
Joker was released. It was all over the news, and I think that just made people want to see it more. And once again, Joaquin Phoenix, people know how talented he is. He's regarded as one of the greatest actors of his generation. Now he is stepping into IP. He's stepping into a comic book universe to portray a character that everybody pretty much knows or at least has a relationship with. So there was just a lot
Mm-hmm.
working for that movie. Whereas this one doesn't really have those same type of talking points,
Yeah.
or at least they didn't lean into them as much as I thought that they would. I thought that they would have leaned into those things like a Lady Gaga and Harley Quinn and all
Yeah.
of that stuff more. But they didn't lean into the musical stuff because I guess they kind of couldn't, because as you noted here, many people don't like musicals, and studios now know this, and Warner Brothers completely steer cleared of highlighting the musical sequences in this movie, just like they did when they were selling Wonka about a year ago, and
Mm-hmm.
even
Mm-hmm.
even Paramount with Mean Girls earlier this year. They're not marketing
Yep.
these movies as musical because there's just this fear that people will just turn away. They don't want to see that. I think the reality is that probably works for a large amount of the audience. I don't think a lot of people knew that this was a musical, but the thing is
Mm-hmm.
that you can't stop word of mouth, and you can't stop negative word of mouth. Once that gets going, it's
Yeah.
almost impossible to put out. And once people hear like, oh, it's a musical, it's a musical, it's a musical, I'm not going to see that. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see
Mm-hmm.
Joker singing, and that's not my Joker. And so that's how you get these decreasing tracking numbers that just kind of get updated regularly, where it's like, oh, they're really not going to perform and do all that well. But I do want to talk about just like the public discourse and just like the sentiment around this too, because
Yeah.
I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because I think that Todd Phillips is a filmmaker and is a creator of this movie. And
Mm-hmm.
and we're kind of getting into the movie here, folks. Like we're not reviewing it yet per se, but we might talk about a few like thematic things about it just as a heads up here.
Yeah.
But Todd Phillips, I think, clearly had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted here. Right?
Yeah.
He brought them $1 billion. He brought them an Academy Award. What are they going to tell him? No, you can't
Mm-hmm.
make the vision that you want to make. There was even a rumor swirling around that they didn't do any sort of test audiences for this movie, which
Mm.
I'm sure Todd Phillips probably negotiated that. Like, we're not testing this movie. I'm making the movie I want to make, and we're putting it out there as is. And we know historically that these big tentpole movies, they test screen the hell out of them over and over again to get reactions and feedback and to fine tune and reshoot and refilm over and over and over again. But they did not do that here. And I think that we're seeing a director who has sort of, I guess he's taken the movie and kind of turned a mirror on the audience in terms of how we walked away from that first one, because a lot of people did enjoy
Mm-hmm.
that first one. And perhaps he's using this movie as a referendum for the success of that first movie. And thematically, I don't know
Mm.
if that resonates with people. I don't know if they want to be I don't know if they want to be berated for enjoying something that came out a few years ago, because it did feel
Mm-hmm.
like that in several times in this movie. It's kind of laughing at us like, why do you like this guy? Why are you rooting
Yeah.
for this character?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you put your support behind somebody who's clearly he's not really all the way there, and he's a murderer and a criminal.
Yeah.
And that's not going to give audiences what they want. And so I'm just kind of interested to know your thoughts on that, and I guess the push and pull of directors maintaining their artistic integrity and making the movie that they
Mm-hmm.
want to make versus delivering what audiences quote unquote expect and what they should get, because those two things are often, I think, at odds with each other.
Yeah, man, there's a lot there, and there's something. What's so crazy about the first Joker? Actually, I'm gonna start here. I made this point about Dune, where Dune, a lot of people didn't realize when Dune, that first book came out back in the 60s, that this was a tale of messiahs are not always messiahs and prophets are not always the most healthy thing for a society and for a culture. A lot of people missed that point. And so Frank had to put out children, or what is it, Dune, what's the name of the book,
Oh, Doom Messiah, like literally it's called Doom
no, Doom
Messiah.
Messiah. Yeah,
Yeah.
he had to put out Doom Messiah to be like, y'all, this was the point all along. Like, you're technically not supposed to be like, Paul Atreides is my favorite protagonist ever. You're kind of like missing the point. And I say that to say, Joker, the first Joker is kind of like, it's this narrative about how like white male rage is born, right? Like, of course, there's Joaquin Phoenix and Arthur as his character, but he's going through his own thing, and on the outside, there's a bunch of jokers putting on clown masks, like, yeah, this is how it's supposed to be, and it's a smart kind of commentary on what that is. But the dude bros, the incels, you know what I'm saying? Everybody's like, oh shoot, I really love, like, hell yeah, I'm part of that white male rage,
Right.
instead of understanding that that's the commentary, is the white male rage. Like, and so part of me almost feels like you said, he feels like the second one is like, why are you, Folie was like, why this, y'all missed the point.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like Doom Messiah a little bit. It's almost like, y'all not really understanding what what I'm trying to say here. And I think that definitely plays into how Todd Phillips made into making this film. And I think that idea, combined with didn't Todd Phillips bring Joker to DC? Like, didn't he say, hey guys, I have an idea.
Yeah.
Can I make this movie? That is way different than, dang, this movie made hella money, we're gonna have to make a sequel, let's come up with a story. That's way different. That has a different level of passion behind it than making the sequel does. That has a different, I don't know, it just all feels different, I think. And I think those two ideas combined with just, I don't know, it makes for a weird telling of a film to me. It makes for a weird, like, oh, this is a weird push and pull of like, do you understand what's happening in this movie? Did you understand what's happening in the last movie? And are you even going to like it when I put this thing out? Are you going to root for this character anymore when I put this thing out? Are you going to get the themes that I'm trying to tell you when I put this thing out? And sometimes I think people can try too hard when they do that. Some people can try not hard enough when they do that. But definitely in watching Folie do, you're like, oh, there's this concept that we're still kind of stuck in, and we're still kind of going through some of the same motions.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm kind of, to be honest, kind of spoiling my review here a bit, but where I land with this movie is the fact that I'm glad that it exists, and I'm glad that we still live in a world where a filmmaker has what I think we can consider a daring vision, something that's risky.
Yeah.
The fact that he's able to still execute it at this high of a level, I think is a good thing. I think that that's beneficial,
Yes.
especially in the glut of stuff that we get that's just the same, and it's derivative, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
the same old shit over and over again. I'm just happy that we can still have, a filmmaker or creator say, like, we're going to go in a different direction. I'm not going to give you what you
Yeah.
expect or what you think that you want. I'm going to go for something completely unique that hasn't been done before. Did it work? No, not really. But the fact that we can still execute that and have it happen, I think is a good thing. And I think it's a valuable thing because it's becoming increasingly rare. The unfortunate thing about it is that Joker as a character is a character, once again, that a lot of people have an attachment to. That's
Mm-hmm.
the thing. This is not just a guy. It's not just Arthur Fleck. You know, he was
Right.
able to just kind of Trojan horse a regular guy into this very recognizable figure, and because of that, everybody has an opinion on it. And you're not going to like what he does if you are a traditionalist, if you're a purist, or whatever the case may be. And I think that in the sort of evolution from the discourse with the first one to this one, we're seeing just we're seeing the damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of approach to all these things, because he was critically reviled with the first one, that he was all those things that you
Mm-hmm.
said, that he was sort of egging on the incel community, that he was just
Right.
adding to the fuel of that fire that exists, where it's like, no, the film itself is the point of it, why society and the decaying sort of urban sort of crime that was happening contributes to that. And ultimately, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just he placed a lot of accountability on Arthur too, but this isn't a new thing. You talked about Dune. I mean, Coppola, which, you know, we'll talk about Megalopolis. I think there's a lot of similarities here eventually,
I was
but
about to say that. Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola did the same thing with The Godfather Part Two. You know, I think a lot of people were
Mm-hmm.
rooting for Michael Corleone, but when you look at that Part Two, you see that this is a increasingly morally compromised human being that you should not be supporting
Absolutely.
at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he embraces the dark side. The Sopranos, I think they had to do it like every season. They had to reset the
Mm-hmm.
idea that Tony Soprano's not a good guy you should not be rooting for. I
Right.
remember rewatching it about 2 years ago, and you know, after season 2 or season 3, I'm like, oh man, Tony is just such a great character. I love him so
I
much.
know. He goes to therapy.
All of that stuff, right? He's trying, and then they
Yeah.
introduce Meadows' boyfriend, who's black, and he just goes full racist. He's just like a
Quick.
completely bigot,
Yep.
you know. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, can't support this guy. And it happened
Mm-hmm.
several times, and so that's what this movie is, I think, in a lot of respects. But also people just don't kind of care. I don't know if they really care enough to even examine it as that type of piece of art per se, but I do respect it that he took it to that direction. I
Mm-hmm.
respect it
Mm-hmm.
that he was trying to say something in that element of what the character is and what he represents, and ultimately how it is supposed to be sort of a mirror on our society, you know, turning
Yeah.
that perspective back on us to get us to question, like, you know, why do we root for this guy? Why do we support this
Mm-hmm.
character? Is that a good thing? All these things that I think are worth exploring, but there's so much more to get to.